When she walked into that upscale restaurant wearing my exact same dress, sat down at our anniversary table, and declared with a smug smile that my husband had chosen her, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my wine glass or cause a scene like she probably expected. Instead, I smiled. Because 3 weeks earlier, I had discovered something that would turn her moment of triumph into the biggest mistake of her life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Cassandra, though everyone calls me Cass. I'm 42 years old, and I live in what used to be our dream home in Westchester County, New York. For the past 15 years, I've worked as a forensic accountant, which means I spend my days following money trails and uncovering financial secrets that people desperately want to keep hidden. It's ironic, really, because the biggest deception in my life was happening right under my nose, and for months, I was completely blind to it. I met Marcus 12 years ago at a charity gala in Manhattan. He was charming, successful, and had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when he talked to you. Marcus worked in commercial real estate development, the kind of guy who could walk into a room full of investors and walk out with a handshake deal worth millions. We dated for 2 years before he proposed on a beach in the Hamptons, and our wedding was everything I had ever dreamed of. Small, intimate, perfect. For the first 8 years of our marriage, things were good, really good. We traveled together, built a beautiful life, supported each other's careers. Marcus was ambitious, sometimes to a fault, but I respected his drive. We talked about having children someday, maybe buying a place in the city, all the usual dreams that couples share when they think they have forever ahead of them. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared about 2 years ago, though I didn't recognize it then. Marcus started working later, traveling more frequently for business deals. When I'd ask about his day, his answers became shorter, more vague. Phone calls that he used to take in front of me suddenly required him to step outside or go into his office. But these changes happened gradually, so gradually that I convinced myself it was just the natural evolution of a long marriage, the way couples settle into comfortable routines. What I didn't know was that Marcus had hired a new marketing coordinator for his development company 18 months ago. Her name was Vivian Chase, and she was everything I wasn't. 28 years old, blonde where I was brunette, bubbly where I was reserved, spontaneous where I was methodical. She had just moved to New York from California, chasing dreams of making it big in the competitive world of commercial real estate marketing. The affair started, as these things often do, with late nights at the office working on what Marcus called a make-or-break project. Then it moved to business dinners that ran later and later. Then weekend strategy sessions that somehow required them to be alone together for hours at a time. By the time I started noticing the changes in Marcus's behavior, they had been sleeping together for 6 months. I wish I could say I was one of those wives who had a gut feeling, who sensed something was wrong from the beginning. But the truth is, I trusted Marcus completely. When he told me he was working late, I believed him. When he said he had to travel to Philadelphia or Boston for client meetings, I never questioned it. When he started keeping his phone face down on the nightstand, I told myself he was just being considerate, not wanting the screen to wake me up. The first real sign that something was wrong came on a Thursday evening in late February. I had been working on a particularly complex case involving embezzlement at a nonprofit organization, the kind of intricate financial puzzle that required me to stay late at the office several nights in a row. I finished earlier than expected and decided to surprise Marcus by picking up dinner from his favorite Thai restaurant and meeting him at his office. His company occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming office building in Midtown, and I had been there dozens of times over the years for company parties and the occasional lunch date. The security guard knew me by name, and the receptionist always greeted me with a warm smile. But that Thursday night, when I stepped off the elevator carrying takeout containers and wearing the smile of a wife planning to surprise her husband, I found the office dark and empty. I called Marcus immediately. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear laughter and music in the background. He sounded slightly out of breath when he said, "Hey babe, what's up?" I told him I was at his office, with dinner, confused about where he was. There was a pause, just a beat too long, before he explained that the client meeting had moved to a restaurant at the last minute. He was so sorry, he should have texted me. Things had gotten crazy with this new deal. I went home that night with cold pad thai and a nagging feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. But I pushed the feeling aside, told myself I was being paranoid, reminded myself that Marcus had never given me a reason not to trust him. That was my mistake. I was so busy convincing myself that everything was fine that I ignored every instinct telling me otherwise. Over the next few weeks, the inconsistencies started adding up. Marcus claimed to be working late, but when I drove by his office building, the lights on his floor were off. He said he had weekend client calls that required him to be in his home office with the door closed for hours, but I could hear him laughing in there, having conversations that sounded nothing like business discussions. His credit card statements showed charges at restaurants I had never been to, flowers I had never received, hotels in the city on nights when he claimed to be working late at the office. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in March. Marcus was in the shower, and his phone was charging on his side of the bed. It buzzed with a text message, and the preview showed on the lock screen before disappearing. The message was from someone named V, and it said, "Last night was incredible. Can't wait for next weekend when we can finally tell everyone." My hands were shaking as I set the phone back down exactly where I found it. Last night was incredible. But last night, Marcus had been home with me. We had watched a movie, made popcorn, gone to bed at our usual time. Unless he wasn't talking about last night. Unless he was planning something for next weekend that I knew nothing about. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly what Marcus was hiding, and I was going to use every skill I had learned in 15 years of forensic accounting to do it. If my husband was having an affair, I wasn't going to confront him based on suspicions and half-glimpsed text messages. I was going to gather evidence, build a case, and know exactly what I was dealing with before I made my next move. The first thing I did was create a separate email account and sign up for a subscription service that would monitor Marcus's digital activity. It's amazing what you can legally discover about someone when you have access to their social security number and know all their personal information. Within 48 hours, I had a detailed report that included his credit history, recent financial transactions, property records, and even his social media activity on platforms I didn't know he used. What I found made my blood run cold.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Marcus had been using a credit card I didn't know existed to pay for hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry purchases, and even a weekend trip to Napa Valley that coincided with a business conference he had told me was in Chicago. The credit card was linked to a checking account that he had opened 6 months earlier, and he had been funneling money from our joint business account to fund what was essentially a separate life. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was discovering that Marcus had been photographing and posting about his relationship with Vivian on a private Instagram account that he had created specifically for their affair. The account was locked and had only a handful of followers, but one of them was a marketing company that specialized in social media management, and their public portfolio included screenshots that showed enough for me to piece together the timeline. Marcus and Vivian weren't just having an affair, they were planning a future together. The photos showed them looking at apartment listings, shopping for engagement rings, and celebrating what appeared to be some kind of relationship milestone. In one photo, Vivian was wearing a diamond necklace that I recognized because I had seen the charge on Marcus's secret credit card statement. In another, they were holding hands outside a wedding venue, and the caption read, "Scouting locations for our special day." I printed everything, every credit card statement, every photo I could access, every hotel receipt and restaurant charge. I organized it all in a binder, cross-referenced dates and times, and created a timeline that told the complete story of Marcus's betrayal. It was exactly the kind of methodical investigation I would conduct for a client, except this time, I was investigating my own life. The hardest part wasn't discovering that my husband was cheating on me. The hardest part was continuing to live normally while I decided what to do with the information. Every morning, I woke up next to Marcus and made coffee and asked about his day, knowing that he was planning to leave me for another woman. Every night, he kissed me goodnight and told me he loved me, and I kissed him back and said the same words, even though I knew they were lies. I considered confronting him immediately, but something held me back. Maybe it was my professional training, or maybe it was pure instinct, but I had the feeling that there was more to discover. Marcus was a planner, methodical in everything he did. If he was going to leave me for Vivian, he would have an exit strategy that went beyond just walking out the door. I needed to know what that strategy was before I showed my hand. My suspicions were confirmed when I discovered that Marcus had been meeting with a divorce attorney. The attorney's name appeared on his private calendar, which I gained access to by installing monitoring software on our shared home computer. Marcus had been careful to schedule these meetings during times when I would be at work or out of town, but he hadn't been careful enough. I called the attorney's office, pretending to be Marcus's assistant, and confirmed that they had several appointments scheduled over the coming weeks. When I asked what documents I should prepare for the next meeting, the receptionist mentioned that they would be discussing asset division and spousal support calculations. My husband wasn't just planning to leave me, he was planning to divorce me, and he was strategizing how to do it in a way that would minimize his financial losses. That's when I realized that Marcus had been playing a much longer game than I had understood. The secret bank account, the careful documentation of our assets, the meetings with the divorce attorney, he had been preparing for months to end our marriage on his terms. Vivian wasn't just his mistress, she was his exit plan, his justification for blowing up the life we had built together. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated me, and more importantly, he had underestimated how thoroughly I could investigate someone when I put my mind to it. While he was busy planning his perfect escape, I was building a case that would expose not just his affair, but every underhanded financial maneuver he had made in preparation for our divorce. The more I dug, the more I found. Marcus had been systematically moving money out of our joint accounts and into investments that would be harder to trace and divide. He had transferred ownership of several valuable assets to his business, effectively hiding them from any potential divorce settlement. He had even been inflating his business expenses and deflating his reported income, creating a paper trail that would make it appear as though he earned far less than he actually did. It was a sophisticated financial deception, the kind of thing that might have worked if he had been married to someone who didn't spend her days unraveling exactly these types of schemes. But Marcus had forgotten that his wife was a forensic accountant, and I had been trained by the best in the business to find money that people were trying to hide. As I compiled my evidence, I started to feel something I hadn't expected. Not just anger or hurt, but a kind of professional satisfaction. Marcus thought he was so clever, so careful in his planning. He had no idea that every move he made was creating a paper trail that I could follow. Every secret transaction was documented, every hidden asset was discoverable, every lie he told could be proven false. I was so focused on building my case against Marcus that I almost missed the most important piece of information. It was buried in his private calendar, sandwiched between meetings with his divorce attorney and dinner reservations with Vivian. On April 15th, exactly 3 weeks before our 12-year wedding anniversary, Marcus had scheduled something called V Announcement Dinner. April 15th was our anniversary. The same night we had dinner reservations at Les Bernardin, the restaurant where Marcus had proposed to me 10 years earlier. The same night that was supposed to be a celebration of our marriage, our history, our love for each other. Marcus was planning to use our anniversary dinner as the venue for some kind of announcement involving Vivian. I sat at my desk staring at that calendar entry for a long time, trying to understand what Marcus was planning. Was he going to tell me about the affair that night? Was he planning to ask for a divorce over dessert at the restaurant where he had once promised to love me forever? Or was he planning something even worse? The answer came when I discovered that Marcus had made a second reservation at Les Bernardin for the same night. Same time, table for 3. He wasn't planning to tell me about Vivian over dinner. He was planning to bring her with him. I don't think I have the words to describe what I felt when I realized what Marcus was planning to do. It wasn't just betrayal, though that was certainly part of it. It was the calculated cruelty of it, the way he had chosen to humiliate me in the most public, painful way possible. Our anniversary dinner at the restaurant that held such significance for us, with the woman he was leaving me for sitting at our table. That's when I decided that Marcus's plan was going to backfire in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. If he wanted to make our anniversary dinner a public spectacle, then that's exactly what he would get.
But the spectacle wouldn't go the way he was expecting because I was going to be prepared in ways that he couldn't anticipate. I spent the next 3 weeks planning my response with the same methodical care that Marcus had put into planning his betrayal. I researched everything I could find about Vivian, from her social media profiles to her employment history to her family background. I prepared copies of every piece of evidence I had gathered about Marcus's affair and his financial deceptions. I consulted with my own divorce attorney, a woman whose reputation for ruthless effectiveness was legendary in New York legal circles. Most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally for what was coming. I practiced staying calm, practiced controlling my reactions, practiced responding to whatever Marcus and Vivian might say or do. I had spent months feeling like a victim of their deception, but I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was going to be the one in control.
The night of our anniversary, I dressed carefully in a black cocktail dress that I knew looked stunning on me. I did my hair and makeup with extra care, choosing bold red lipstick that would photograph well and make me look confident and composed. I wore the diamond earrings Marcus had given me for our 5th anniversary, not out of sentimentality, but because they were expensive and I wanted to remind him of everything he was throwing away. I arrived at Le Bernardin exactly on time, and the maitre d' greeted me with the warm familiarity of someone who had seen Marcus and me there many times over the years. He led me to our usual table, the one by the window with a view of the city lights, and I ordered a glass of champagne while I waited. Marcus arrived 15 minutes later, looking nervous and slightly sweaty despite the cool April evening. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal gray one he saved for important business meetings and special occasions. He kissed me on the cheek when he sat down, and his lips felt cold against my skin. We ordered dinner and made small talk about work, about the weather, about plans for the upcoming summer. Marcus seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly and glancing toward the restaurant's entrance every few minutes. I knew he was waiting for Vivian, but I pretended not to notice, chatting cheerfully about a case I was working on and asking him about his latest development project. Our appetizers had just arrived when I saw her walk through the door. Vivian was exactly what I had expected based on her social media photos, but seeing her in person was still jarring. She was beautiful in an obvious way, with long blonde hair and a figure that she displayed in a tight red dress that was completely inappropriate for a restaurant like Le Bernardin. She walked with the kind of confidence that comes from being young and desired, scanning the dining room until her eyes found our table. Marcus saw her at the same moment I did, and I watched his face change. The nervousness disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like excitement. He was actually looking forward to this, I realized. He was anticipating the moment when he would drop this bomb on me, looking forward to seeing my reaction when his mistress joined us at our anniversary dinner. Vivian approached our table with a smile that was equal parts triumphant and predatory. She didn't wait for an invitation to sit down, pulling out the empty chair and settling herself at our table as if she belonged there. The other diners in the restaurant were starting to notice the unusual scene, whispers and curious glances following in her wake. She looked directly at me with those calculating blue eyes and spoke the words that Marcus had undoubtedly coached her to say. "I'm sorry to interrupt your anniversary dinner," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all, "but Marcus and I have something important to tell you. He chose me. We're going to be together, and we wanted you to hear it from us." The restaurant seemed to go quiet around us, though that might have been my imagination. I could feel the eyes of other diners on our table, could sense the collective intake of breath as people realized they were witnessing some kind of dramatic confrontation. Marcus was watching me intently, waiting for my reaction, probably expecting tears or anger or some kind of emotional breakdown. Instead, I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sarcastic smile, but a genuine, warm smile that seemed to confuse both of them. I took a sip of my champagne, set the glass down carefully, and looked at Vivian with what I hoped appeared to be mild amusement. "That's interesting," I said, keeping my voice level and conversational. "When did he tell you that he chose you?" Vivian glanced at Marcus, clearly not expecting this response.
We've been together for over a year, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. We're in love, real love, not some marriage of convenience that's been dead for years. I nodded thoughtfully, as if I were considering her words carefully. A year is a long time, I agreed. You must know him pretty well by now. Did he tell you about his other girlfriend? The smile faltered on Vivian's face, and Marcus went very still beside her. What other girlfriend? She asked, though her voice had lost some of its confidence. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder, the same type I used for client presentations. Well, this is awkward, I said, opening the folder and spreading several photographs across the table. I was going to surprise Marcus with these tonight, but since you're here, I suppose you should see them too. The photographs showed Marcus with another woman, a brunette I had identified as Rebecca Martinez, a client relations manager at one of his biggest accounts. The photos had been taken by a private investigator I had hired after discovering that Marcus's secret credit card showed charges that didn't match his documented activities with Vivian. Vivian picked up one of the photos with shaking hands. It showed Marcus and Rebecca kissing outside a hotel in Newark, dated just 2 weeks earlier. This isn't possible, she whispered, but even as she said it, I could see the recognition in her eyes. She had probably wondered about some of Marcus's absences, some of his excuses that didn't quite add up. Marcus was staring at the photos in shock, his face pale and his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. He had been so careful about hiding his affair with Vivian from me that he hadn't considered the possibility that I might discover his affair with Rebecca too. There are more, I said helpfully, sliding another set of photos across the table. These showed Marcus and Rebecca at a romantic dinner, holding hands across the table at a restaurant I recognized from his credit card statements. This one was taken last weekend, when he told you he was visiting his mother in Connecticut, and he told me he was at a business conference in Philadelphia. Vivian was looking back and forth between the photos and Marcus, and I could see the exact moment when everything clicked into place for her. She wasn't the only other woman. She wasn't even the most recent other woman. She was just one of several women that Marcus was juggling, telling each of them whatever they wanted to hear. You bastard, she said, turning to Marcus with fury blazing in her eyes. You told me I was the only one. You said you were going to leave your wife for me. You said we were going to be together. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. Vivian, I can explain. Those photos, they're not what they look like. Rebecca is just a business contact. We were discussing a potential deal. Really? I interrupted, pulling out another document. Because your credit card statements show that you've been paying for her apartment for the past 4 months. That's a pretty expensive business discussion. I was enjoying this more than I probably should have been, but I couldn't help myself. For months, Marcus had been lying to me, manipulating me, planning to humiliate me at our anniversary dinner. Now he was the one being humiliated, caught in his web of lies with nowhere to hide. Vivian stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor.
I can't believe I wasted a year of my life on you, she said, her voice rising loud enough that the entire restaurant could hear. I can't believe I thought you actually loved me. You're just a lying, cheating piece of garbage who can't commit to anyone. She turned to me then, and I saw something unexpected in her expression. Not anger, but something that looked almost like respect. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time since she had sat down, she sounded genuine. I had no idea he was doing this to you, too. I thought I was stealing him away from some boring wife who didn't appreciate him. I had no idea you were just another one of his victims. With that, she grabbed her purse and stalked out of the restaurant, leaving Marcus and me alone at our anniversary table with the photographs spread out between us like evidence in a courtroom. The other diners were pretending not to watch, but I could feel their attention like a physical presence. Marcus looked at me across the table, and I could see him trying to figure out his next move. He was a salesman at heart, always looking for the angle that would get him what he wanted. But for once in his life, he seemed to be at a complete loss for words. How long have you known? He asked finally. About Vivian? 3 months. About Rebecca? 2 weeks. About the secret bank account and the meetings with the divorce attorney? Long enough. Marcus's face went even paler. What divorce attorney? I smiled again, the same calm, controlled smile I had been practicing. The one you've been meeting with to discuss how to hide assets and minimize spousal support payments. The one whose office set you a retainer agreement that you signed and paid for with money from our joint account. I reached into my folder again and pulled out a copy of the retainer agreement, along with the canceled check Marcus had written to pay for it. Did you really think I wouldn't find out, Marcus? I'm a forensic accountant. Finding hidden money and secret financial arrangements is literally what I do for a living. Marcus stared at the documents as if he were seeing them for the first time. Cass, I can explain all of this. Things got complicated, but it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I interrupted. You've been planning to divorce me for months. You've been hiding assets, moving money around, and setting up your exit strategy while pretending to be a loving husband. You've been sleeping with multiple women while telling each of us that we were the only one. You planned to humiliate me at our anniversary dinner by bringing your mistress to announce that you were leaving me? I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't experienced in months. The only thing you didn't plan for was the possibility that I would find out about all of it before you were ready to make your move. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring down at his untouched dinner. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his expression. Not shame exactly, but a kind of resignation, as if he had finally accepted that his carefully constructed plan had fallen apart. "What happens now?" he asked. I finished my champagne and signaled the waiter for the check. "Now, you're going to pay for this dinner, because it's the last meal you'll ever buy me. Tomorrow morning, you're going to move out of our house. By the end of the week, you're going to receive divorce papers that will make sure I get everything I'm entitled to, including compensation for all the money you tried to hide." I stood up and gathered my folder, leaving the photographs scattered on the table. "And Marcus, the next time you decide to cheat on someone, you might want to make sure she's not smarter than you are." I walked out of La Bernardine with my head held high, leaving my cheating husband alone at our anniversary table with the wreckage of his failed plan surrounding him like broken glass. Outside on the street, I took a deep breath of the cool April air and realized that for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely again. The hardest part was over. I had faced the truth, confronted the lies, and taken back control of my life. Marcus thought he could manipulate me, deceive me, and discard me when it was convenient for him. Instead, he had underestimated the woman he married, and now he was going to pay the price for that mistake. As I walked home through the streets of Manhattan, I started planning my next moves with the same methodical precision I brought to all my cases. Marcus was about to discover that divorcing a forensic accountant who had months to prepare was very different from divorcing the unsuspecting wife he thought I was. But that's a story for tomorrow. Tonight, I was just going to go home, pour myself another glass of champagne, and celebrate the fact that I had turned what was supposed to be the worst night of my life into the beginning of my freedom. The morning after our anniversary dinner disaster, I woke up in my own bed for what I knew would be one of the last times in the house Marcus and I had shared for 8 years. The sunrise was streaming through the windows of our bedroom, the same bedroom where my husband had been lying to my face for over a year while planning his elaborate exit strategy. Marcus hadn't come home the night before. I had expected that, honestly. After the public humiliation at La Bernardine, after watching his carefully orchestrated plan crumble in front of half the restaurant's patrons, I figured he would either check into a hotel or crawl back to one of his girlfriends for comfort. I almost felt sorry for whichever woman got stuck consoling him, because Marcus in crisis mode was not a pleasant experience. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen island where we used to share breakfast and discuss our days ahead. The normalcy of the routine felt surreal after everything that had happened, but there was something comforting about starting this new chapter of my life with familiar rituals. I had work to do, and I needed to approach it with the same professional mindset I brought to my most complex cases.
My phone had been buzzing with messages since 6 in the morning. 3 missed calls from Marcus, 2 voicemails I hadn't listened to, and a series of increasingly frantic text messages that started with apologies and escalated to demands that I call him back immediately so we could talk like adults and work this out. I deleted them all without reading past the first few words. We were way beyond the talking stage. The first call I made was to my attorney, Patricia Kellerman, whose reputation for aggressive divorce litigation had earned her the nickname the Piranha among New York's legal community. I had consulted with her briefly 3 weeks earlier, but now it was time to put our preliminary discussions into action. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and businesslike even at 7:30 in the morning.
Cassandra, I've been expecting your call. How did last night go? I gave her a brief summary of the anniversary dinner confrontation, including Marcus's shock when he realized I knew about both of his affairs and his financial deceptions. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making small noises of approval when I described particularly damaging revelations. "Excellent work," she said when I finished. "The fact that you documented everything before confronting him gives us a significant advantage. Most people let their emotions drive them to confront the cheating spouse before they've built a proper case. You've essentially done half my job for me." We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon to review all the evidence I had compiled and begin drafting the divorce petition. Patricia wanted to move quickly before Marcus had time to regroup and start hiding additional assets or destroying evidence. She also suggested that I change all the passwords on our joint accounts and credit cards, effectively freezing Marcus out until we could get temporary court orders in place. My second call was to my bank, where I spoke with the manager who had helped me set up our joint accounts when Marcus and I first bought the house. I explained that I was filing for divorce and needed to protect our shared assets from any unauthorized withdrawals. Within an hour, I had transferred half the money from our joint savings and checking accounts into new accounts in my name only, leaving Marcus access to his fair share, but preventing him from cleaning out our finances in a fit of spite. The third call was to a locksmith. I know it sounds petty, but I wasn't taking any chances. If Marcus decided to come home while I was at work, I didn't want him to have the opportunity to destroy evidence or remove valuable items from the house. The locksmith arrived by 10 o'clock and changed all the locks on the exterior doors, providing me with new keys and confirming that the old ones would no longer work. By the time I left for my office, I had effectively locked Marcus out of his own life. He couldn't access our joint bank accounts, couldn't get into the house without my permission, and couldn't make any major financial moves without my knowledge. It felt powerful in a way that I hadn't experienced in months of feeling helpless and deceived. My office was located in a sleek building in Lower Manhattan, where I worked for a boutique forensic accounting firm that specialized in high-stakes divorce cases and corporate fraud investigations. My colleagues were used to seeing me handle other people's messy financial situations with professional detachment, but today I was grateful that most of them were too polite or too busy to ask why I looked like I hadn't slept and why I was clutching a thick folder of documents like it contained state secrets. I spent the morning working on client cases, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy while my personal life exploded around me. But my concentration kept drifting to the folder on my desk and to the phone that kept buzzing with increasingly angry messages from Marcus. By 11 o'clock, his tone had shifted from apologetic to demanding to outright threatening. "Cass, what you did last night was completely unfair and you know it. Call me back so we can discuss this rationally. I know you're upset, but you're blowing this out of proportion. I can't get into our house and I can't access our bank accounts. This is illegal and I'm going to call my lawyer if you don't fix this immediately." "Fine, play hardball if you want to, but you're going to regret this when you realize what you're throwing away. We can work through this if you stop being so dramatic about everything." I forwarded all the messages to Patricia without responding to any of them. Let Marcus wonder what I was planning next. Let him experience the uncertainty and lack of control that I had been living with for months while he orchestrated his betrayal behind my back. Around noon, I received an unexpected visitor. My assistant knocked on my office door and announced that Vivian Chase was in the lobby, asking to speak with me. I was surprised, but curious enough to agree to see her. Whatever she had to say, it was probably worth hearing. Vivian looked very different in the harsh light of day than she had in the romantic atmosphere of Le Bernardin. She was still beautiful, but there was something deflated about her, as if the confidence that had carried her into that restaurant had evaporated overnight. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and I could see that she had been crying recently. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "but I needed to talk to you. About Marcus, about everything that happened last night." I gestured for her to continue, keeping my expression neutral. I was curious to hear what she had to say, but I wasn't ready to start bonding with her over our shared victimization just yet. "I can't stop thinking about those photos you showed us," she continued, "about Rebecca, about the lies Marcus told both of us. I've been going over everything in my head, trying to figure out what was real and what was just manipulation." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I thought I knew him. I thought we had something special, something worth destroying a marriage for. But seeing those pictures, realizing that I was just another affair to him, another woman he was stringing along with promises he had no intention of keeping." "How did you find out about me?" I asked. "I mean, how did you know Marcus was married?" Vivian looked up, surprised by the question. "He told me from the beginning. He said you two had grown apart, that the marriage was basically over, but you were dragging your feet about the divorce. He made it sound like you were the one being unreasonable, holding on to something that was already dead." I felt a familiar surge of anger, but I kept my voice level. "And you believed that?" "I wanted to believe it," she admitted. "Marcus can be very convincing when he wants something. He told me you were cold, distant, more interested in your career than in your marriage. He said you hadn't been intimate in over a year, that you basically lived like roommates." That last lie hit me particularly hard, because Marcus and I had been intimate just 2 weeks ago. We had made love on a lazy Sunday morning, and he had whispered that he loved me while I drifted off to sleep in his arms. The memory made me sick now, knowing that he had probably been thinking about Vivian or Rebecca the entire time. "He showed me photos of you," Vivian continued, "but they were all old pictures where you looked serious or unhappy. He said you never smiled anymore, that you had become bitter and difficult to live with. He made me feel like I was saving him from a miserable situation." "And the anniversary dinner? Whose idea was that?"
Vivian's cheeks flushed red. "Mine. I'm so ashamed now, but I thought it would be poetic justice. I thought you had been making his life miserable, and I wanted to show you that someone actually loved and appreciated him. I wanted to prove that I could make him happier than you ever could." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I had no idea you didn't know about the affair. I thought you knew about me and were just refusing to let him go. Marcus told me you were being vindictive, trying to take half his assets out of spite, even though you didn't love him anymore." The picture was becoming clearer now. Marcus had been playing both sides, telling Vivian that I was the obstacle to their happiness, while telling me that he was working late and traveling for business. He had convinced her that she was the wronged party, the other woman fighting for true love against a bitter wife who wouldn't let go. "What about Rebecca?" I asked. "Did you ever suspect there was someone else?" Vivian nodded miserably. "There were times when he would cancel plans at the last minute, or when he would be unreachable for hours at a time. He always had explanations: client emergencies, family obligations, work crises that required his immediate attention. I questioned him a few times, but he was so good at making me feel guilty for not trusting him." She wiped her eyes with a tissue. "He would say things like, 'I'm risking everything to be with you, and this is the thanks I get?' Or, 'I'm trying to handle a delicate situation with my wife, and you're making it harder by being jealous and possessive.' I always ended up apologizing." I was starting to understand the full scope of Marcus's manipulation. He wasn't just cheating on me and lying to his girlfriends. He was actively playing us against each other, using our emotions and insecurities to maintain control over the situation. It was sociopathic in its calculation and cruelty. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "What do you want from me?" Vivian took a deep breath. "I want to help you destroy him. I want to make sure he pays for what he did to both of us. I know things about his business, about his finances, about relationships with clients that might be useful in your divorce. I want to give you everything I know." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. But she seemed genuinely remorseful, genuinely angry at Marcus for manipulating her. And she was right that she probably knew things about his professional life that I hadn't been able to uncover on my own. "All right," I said finally, "tell me what you know." For the next hour, Vivian provided me with a detailed account of Marcus's business practices, some of which raised serious red flags about potential fraud and ethics violations. She told me about deals where Marcus had inflated property values to secure larger loans, about bribes disguised as consulting fees, about investors who had been misled about the risks and potential returns of his development projects. She also provided me with copies of text messages and emails that Marcus had sent her, many of which contradicted statements he had made to me about his whereabouts and activities. The digital evidence was incredibly valuable, providing timestamps and locations that would be difficult for Marcus to explain away in court. Most importantly, Vivian confirmed my suspicions about Marcus's financial deceptions. She had been present during phone conversations where Marcus discussed moving money offshore and restructuring his business to hide assets from potential creditors. She even had photos of documents that Marcus had asked her to help him organize, including bank statements for accounts I had never heard of. "There's something else," Vivian said as our meeting was winding down. "Marcus is planning to leave the country. He told me it was for business, a big development project in the Cayman Islands that would require him to relocate for at least a year. But now I'm wondering if it was his backup plan in case the divorce didn't go the way he wanted." My blood ran cold. If Marcus was planning to flee the country, he could take his hidden assets with him and leave me with nothing but legal bills and the satisfaction of knowing I had been right about his character. I needed to move even faster than I had planned. After Vivian left, I immediately called Patricia and filled her in on everything I had learned. She was particularly interested in the evidence of potential fraud and the possibility that Marcus might attempt to leave the country with marital assets. "We need to file for an emergency injunction," Patricia said. "If there's any chance he's planning to flee with hidden assets, we need to get a court order freezing all his accounts and preventing him from leaving the country. I can have the papers filed by the end of business today." I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was no longer just about divorce and asset division. This was about preventing Marcus from escaping the consequences of his actions entirely. If we could prove that he had been planning to defraud me and potentially other investors, we might be able to recover not just marital assets, but additional damages for his fraudulent conduct. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of legal consultations and document preparation. Patricia's office worked with the efficiency of a military operation, drafting emergency motions and organizing exhibits with the precision of a surgical strike. By 5 o'clock, we had filed for an emergency hearing to freeze Marcus's assets and restrict his travel pending a full investigation of his financial affairs. I stayed at the office until nearly 8 o'clock, helping Patricia's team organize the evidence and prepare for the hearing scheduled for the following morning. It was meticulous work that required my full attention, and I was grateful for the distraction from the emotional turmoil of the past 24 hours. When I finally returned home, I found Marcus waiting on the front porch of our house, looking like he had been there for hours. He was disheveled and clearly agitated, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. When he saw me approaching, he rushed toward my car with an expression that was equal parts desperate and furious. "Cass, we need to talk. This has gone far enough. You've made your point, but now we need to work this out like adults." I got out of my car slowly, keeping my distance from him. There was something different about his demeanor, something that made me wary of getting too close. "There's nothing to work out, Marcus. I filed for divorce today, and tomorrow morning there's going to be a hearing about your hidden assets and fraudulent business practices."
Marcus's face went pale. "What are you talking about? What fraudulent business practices?" "I know about the offshore accounts, the inflated property values, the bribes disguised as consulting fees. I know about your plan to relocate to the Cayman Islands. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Marcus took a step backward, his mouth opening and closing without sound. He looked genuinely shocked, as if he couldn't believe I had uncovered so much information so quickly. "Vivian," he said finally, "that bitch told you about my business dealings." Vivian told me a lot of things. So did the private investigator I hired to follow you, and the financial records I subpoenaed from your business accounts, and the documentation I found in your private calendar and email accounts. Marcus's shock was rapidly transforming into rage. "You had no right to investigate me like some kind of criminal. You violated my privacy, my trust." "Your trust?" I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of his accusation. "You've been lying to me for over a year, planning to leave me for multiple other women while stealing money from our joint accounts to fund your affairs. And you're worried about your privacy?" "This is insane," Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. "You're acting like some kind of detective instead of my wife. We used to love each other, Cass. We used to be partners. Can't we find a way to work through this?" For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He looked genuinely bewildered by the turn of events, as if he couldn't understand how his careful planning had gone so wrong. But then I remembered the storage receipts, the secret bank accounts, the meetings with the divorce attorney, and the sympathy evaporated. "We stopped being partners the moment you decided to cheat on me and plan your exit strategy behind my back. We stopped being partners when you brought your mistress to our anniversary dinner to humiliate me in public. You made your choice, Marcus. Now you have to live with the consequences." I walked toward the front door of our house, leaving Marcus standing in the driveway. He called after me, his voice rising with panic. "Cass, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I'll break things off with Vivian and Rebecca. I'll transfer all the money back. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't destroy me." I stopped and turned back to look at him one last time. "You should have thought about that before you decided I was expendable." Inside the house, I double-locked the door and set the alarm system. Through the window, I could see Marcus still standing in the driveway, talking on his phone with animated gestures. He was probably calling his attorney, or maybe one of his girlfriends, trying to figure out his next move now that his world was collapsing around him. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the living room, surrounded by the life Marcus and I had built together. Tomorrow, everything would change. The emergency hearing would determine whether Marcus would be allowed to continue conducting business as usual, or whether his assets would be frozen pending a full investigation. If Patricia was right, we had enough evidence to not only win a favorable divorce settlement, but potentially expose Marcus to criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw that it was from Rebecca Martinez, Marcus's other girlfriend. The message was brief but powerful. "I saw the news about the restaurant incident. I have information about Marcus that you need to know. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time, wondering how many other women Marcus had been deceiving, how many other lies and manipulations I had yet to discover. But I also felt a sense of satisfaction. Marcus had spent over a year building his house of cards, carefully constructing his web of deceptions and betrayals. Now that house was collapsing, and everyone he had lied to was coming forward to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. I texted Rebecca back, agreeing to meet her the following afternoon after the court hearing. If she had additional evidence of Marcus's misconduct, I wanted to hear it. The more ammunition I had, the better equipped I would be to ensure that Marcus faced the full consequences of his actions. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I had been a woman living in denial, clinging to the illusion of a happy marriage while my husband planned to abandon me. Tonight, I was a woman in control of her destiny, armed with evidence and allies, ready to fight for everything I deserved. Marcus had underestimated me in every possible way. He had thought I was weak, naive, too trusting to uncover his deceptions. He had thought he could manipulate me the same way he had manipulated Vivian and Rebecca, using my emotions against me to maintain control over the situation. He had been wrong about all of it. Tomorrow's hearing would be the first real test of our respective strategies.
Marcus would probably try to minimize his misconduct, paint himself as a man who had made mistakes, but was fundamentally honest and deserving of a second chance. His attorneys would argue that I was being vindictive, that I was using my professional skills to wage warfare rather than seeking a fair resolution. But I had facts on my side, documentation that couldn't be explained away with charm and excuses. I had witnesses who were willing to testify about Marcus's fraudulent conduct. Most importantly, I had the element of surprise. Marcus was still reacting to revelations, still trying to figure out how much I knew and what I was planning to do with the information. I was 3 steps ahead of him, and I intended to stay there. The house felt different that night, quieter, but not empty. It felt like mine in a way it hadn't in months, as if removing Marcus's presence had allowed me to reclaim the space we had shared. I walked through the rooms we had furnished together, remembering happier times, but not mourning them. That version of our relationship had been built on lies, and now that the truth was exposed, I could finally start building something authentic. I fell asleep that night with my phone beside me, ready for whatever revelations the next day might bring.
Marcus had spent over a year planning his betrayal, but I was discovering that I was much better at strategic thinking than he had ever been. His plan had been built on the assumption that I would never figure out what he was doing, that I would remain the trusting wife while he orchestrated his escape. Instead, I had become the architect of his downfall, using every skill I had developed in my professional life to expose his deceptions and ensure that justice was served. Marcus wanted to play games with people's lives and emotions. I was about to show him what it felt like to play those games with someone who was better at them than he was. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock the next morning, and I intended to be ready for whatever Marcus and his legal team might throw at me. I had spent my entire career following money trails and uncovering financial deceptions. Now I was going to use those same skills to make sure that my cheating husband couldn't steal his way out of the consequences of his actions. This was just the beginning of what I suspected would be a long and complex legal battle. But for the first time since discovering Marcus's betrayal, I felt confident about the outcome. I had the truth on my side, and I had finally stopped being the victim of his manipulations. Tomorrow, Marcus would discover what it was like to face an opponent who was smarter, better prepared, and more ruthless than he had ever imagined possible. The courthouse was buzzing with early morning activity when Patricia and I arrived at 8:15, 45 minutes before our emergency hearing was scheduled to begin. The Manhattan Family Court building always felt imposing with its marble columns and soaring ceilings, but today it felt like a battlefield where my future would be decided. Patricia carried 3 briefcases packed with evidence, and I had my own folder containing the most damaging documents we planned to present. We had spent the previous evening until nearly midnight preparing our strategy, and Patricia's confidence was infectious. She had handled hundreds of high-stakes divorce cases, but she told me this was one of the most well-documented cases of marital fraud she had ever seen. Marcus's own digital footprints and financial records had created an airtight case against him. Rebecca Martinez was waiting for us in the hallway outside the courtroom, clutching a manila envelope that she said contained additional evidence of Marcus's fraudulent business practices. She looked nervous but determined, dressed professionally in a navy suit that made her appear older and more serious than she had in the surveillance photos. When she saw me approaching, she stood up and extended her hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this situation is incredibly difficult, and I want you to know how sorry I am for my part in it." I shook her hand, studying her face for any signs of deception or hidden agenda. Like Vivian, Rebecca seemed genuinely remorseful about her involvement with Marcus, and more importantly, she appeared determined to expose the full extent of his misconduct. "What kind of evidence do you have?" Patricia asked, getting straight to business. Rebecca opened her envelope and spread several documents across the small table in the courthouse hallway. "Marcus asked me to help him prepare financial reports for potential investors in his Cayman Islands project. I work in financial analysis, so he said he needed my expertise to make the numbers look more attractive." She pointed to a spreadsheet that showed dramatically inflated property values and projected returns that seemed impossible given current market conditions.
He wanted me to adjust these figures to make the investment opportunity appear more lucrative than it actually was. When I questioned some of the numbers, he told me that all real estate developers engage in creative accounting and that I was being naive about how business worked. Patricia examined the documents with the focused intensity of a predator who had just spotted her prey. These projected returns are completely unrealistic. No legitimate development project could generate this kind of profit margin. This is securities fraud, plain and simple. Rebecca nodded grimly. There's more. Marcus also asked me to help him set up shell companies in the Cayman Islands that would be owned by these fake entities, making it nearly impossible to trace the money back to him. He said it was for tax purposes, but I started to suspect he was planning to move money out of the country permanently. She handed Patricia another set of documents showing the corporate structure Marcus had been developing. It was incredibly sophisticated, with multiple layers of ownership designed to obscure the true source and destination of funds. If Marcus had been allowed to complete this plan, he could have transferred millions of dollars offshore and made it virtually impossible for me to recover my share of our marital assets. "Why are you coming forward now?" I asked. "Why didn't you report this earlier?" Rebecca looked down at her hands, clearly struggling with shame and regret. "Because I was in love with him, or at least I thought I was. Marcus has this way of making you feel like you're part of something important, like you're helping him build something amazing. He made me believe that we were partners, that we had a future together." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. When I saw the news coverage of what happened at the restaurant, when I realized that he had been lying to me about you, about Vivian, about everything, I finally understood that I had been helping him commit crimes. I couldn't live with that knowledge without trying to make it right. At 8:55, Marcus arrived at the courthouse with his attorney, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who had a reputation for aggressive tactics and questionable ethics. Marcus looked haggard and sleep-deprived, as if he had spent the night trying to figure out how to salvage his crumbling empire. When he saw Rebecca sitting with Patricia and me, his face went ashen. He whispered something urgent to his attorney, who frowned and shook his head. I could see Marcus becoming more agitated, gesturing toward our group and speaking in increasingly animated tones. His attorney finally placed a restraining hand on his arm and guided him toward the defendant's table. Judge Catherine Morrison entered the courtroom precisely at 9 o'clock, her black robes flowing behind her as she took her place behind the bench. Judge Morrison had a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency and a particular distaste for litigants who attempted to hide assets or deceive the court. She was exactly the kind of judge we wanted for this case. "Good morning," Judge Morrison said, settling into her chair and opening the case file. "I've reviewed the emergency motion filed yesterday by the plaintiff's counsel. These are serious allegations of asset concealment and potential fraud. Mr. Donovan, how does your client respond to these charges?" Marcus's attorney, Leonard Donovan, stood and adjusted his tie before responding. "Your Honor, my client categorically denies any wrongdoing. Mr. Whitmore is a successful businessman who has always conducted his affairs in accordance with applicable laws and regulations. The plaintiff is attempting to use her professional skills as a forensic accountant to wage warfare against her estranged husband, rather than seeking a fair and equitable resolution to their marital dispute." Judge Morrison looked unimpressed by this opening statement. "Mr. Donovan, I'm less interested in your characterization of the plaintiff's motivations than I am in your client's response to the specific allegations contained in her motion. Does your client deny that he opened secret bank accounts and moved marital assets without his wife's knowledge?"
Donovan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direct question. "Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore made certain financial arrangements in preparation for what he hoped would be an amicable separation. These were prudent business decisions designed to protect both parties' interests." "By hiding money from his wife?" Judge Morrison asked, raising an eyebrow. "Mr. Donovan, I've been presiding over divorce cases for 15 years, and I can assure you that secret bank accounts are never in the other spouse's interest. Let's move on to the evidence." Patricia stood and began presenting our case with the precision of a master prosecutor. She started with the credit card statements, showing charges for hotels, restaurants, and jewelry that Marcus had purchased for his affairs. She moved on to the bank records documenting the secret accounts and the systematic transfer of marital assets. Finally, she presented the evidence of Marcus's business fraud and his plans to move money offshore. Each piece of evidence was damning on its own, but together they painted a picture of calculated deception that spanned more than a year. Judge Morrison examined each document carefully, asking pointed questions about dates, amounts, and the source of the information. Her expression grew increasingly stern as the scope of Marcus's misconduct became clear. "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Morrison said, addressing me directly, "as a forensic accountant, can you explain to the court how you uncovered this information?" I stood and faced the judge, feeling more confident than I had in months. "Your Honor, I began investigating my husband's financial activities after discovering inconsistencies in his explanations for his whereabouts and expenses. Using standard forensic accounting techniques, I was able to trace funds through multiple accounts and identify patterns of deception that indicated both marital infidelity and potential securities fraud." "And you documented all of this before confronting your husband about the affairs?" "Yes, Your Honor. I wanted to ensure that I had complete information before taking any action. I also wanted to protect myself from any attempt to hide or destroy evidence after the deception was exposed." Judge Morrison nodded approvingly, a prudent approach. "Mr. Donovan, does your client dispute the authenticity of these financial records?" Donovan whispered with Marcus for several minutes before responding. "Your Honor, we don't dispute the authenticity of the records, but we maintain that my client's business arrangements were legitimate and that any personal expenses were his prerogative as the primary breadwinner in the marriage." "The primary breadwinner?" Judge Morrison looked incredulous. "Mr. Donovan, according to the tax returns and evidence, Mrs. Whitmore earned more than your client in 3 of the last 5 years. And even if your client were the sole breadwinner, that wouldn't give him the right to hide marital assets or commit securities fraud." Patricia then called Rebecca as a witness, and her testimony was devastating. Rebecca described in detail how Marcus had asked her to help falsify financial documents and set up offshore shell companies. She provided specific examples of conversations where Marcus had admitted his intent to move money out of the country to avoid paying alimony and property division. "Mr. Whitmore told me that he needed to be smart about protecting his assets," Rebecca testified, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "He said that divorce courts always favored women and that he needed to make sure his wife couldn't take everything he had worked for. He was planning to transfer most of his money to the Cayman Islands and claimed that his business had failed due to market conditions." Marcus whispered frantically to his attorney throughout Rebecca's testimony, his face growing redder with each damaging revelation. When Donovan cross-examined Rebecca, she remained calm and consistent, providing additional details that made Marcus's misconduct even more clear. The final blow came when Patricia presented evidence of Marcus's communications with a private investigator he had hired to gather compromising information about me. The investigator's reports showed that Marcus had been looking for evidence of an affair or professional misconduct that he could use to discredit me in divorce proceedings. When the investigation turned up nothing, Marcus had discussed planting evidence or creating false documentation. "Your Honor," Patricia said, holding up printed emails between Marcus and the investigator, "the defendant was not only hiding assets and committing fraud, but he was actively planning to frame his wife for misconduct she had never committed. This represents a level of calculated malice that goes far beyond ordinary marital discord." Judge Morrison had heard enough. She called a brief recess to review the evidence, and when court reconvened, her decision was swift and decisive. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, looking directly at Marcus, "I have presided over thousands of divorce cases, and I have never seen such a comprehensive pattern of deception and fraud perpetrated by one spouse against another. Your conduct represents a fundamental violation of the trust that forms the foundation of marriage, and your attempts to hide assets and commit securities fraud demonstrate a disregard for legal and ethical standards that is deeply troubling." Marcus started to stand, but Judge Morrison held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not finished, Mr. Whitmore. The evidence presented today suggests that you may have committed multiple felonies, including securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. I am ordering that all of your assets be immediately frozen pending a full investigation by the appropriate authorities. You are also prohibited from leaving the country, and your passport will be surrendered to the court."
The judge turned to Patricia and me. Mrs. Whitmore, given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and your husband's attempts to hide marital assets, I am granting your request for exclusive use of the marital home and temporary spousal support in the amount of $15,000 per month. Mr. Whitmore will be responsible for all of your legal fees related to uncovering his fraudulent conduct. Marcus finally spoke, his voice cracking with desperation. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. I can explain everything if you'll just give me the chance. Mr. Whitmore, Judge Morrison interrupted, you've had over a year to explain your conduct to your wife, and instead you chose to lie and deceive her while planning to defraud her out of her fair share of marital assets. The time for explanations has passed. She banged her gavel with finality. I am also ordering that the District Attorney's Office be provided with copies of all evidence presented today for potential criminal prosecution. This court will not tolerate fraud and deception, regardless of the personal relationships involved. As we left the courthouse, I felt a sense of vindication that was almost overwhelming. Marcus's carefully constructed plan had not only failed, but it had backfired so spectacularly that he was now facing potential criminal charges for his attempts to cheat me out of our shared assets. Patricia was practically glowing with professional satisfaction.
In 25 years of practice, I've never seen a case where the evidence was so comprehensive or the outcome so decisive. Marcus thought he was dealing with a naive wife who would never figure out what he was doing. Instead, he was dealing with one of the best forensic accountants in the city. Rebecca approached us outside the courthouse, looking relieved but still emotional. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make this right," she said. "I know I can never undo the damage I helped cause, but at least Marcus won't be able to hurt anyone else the way he hurt us." We parted ways outside the courthouse, but not before exchanging contact information. Rebecca was facing her own legal challenges related to her involvement in Marcus's fraudulent schemes, but her cooperation with our case would likely result in reduced charges or immunity from prosecution. Vivian was waiting for me at my office when I returned, clutching a newspaper that featured a front-page story about the morning's court proceedings. "Prominent real estate developer accused of marriage fraud," the headline read, accompanied by a photo of Marcus looking haggard and defeated as he left the courthouse. "I saw the news," Vivian said, handing me the paper. "I can't believe how extensive his lies were. Reading about the offshore accounts and the fake investment schemes, I realize I never knew him at all." She paused, looking thoughtful. "I keep thinking about all the times he told me he loved me, all the promises he made about our future together. None of it was real. He was just using me to justify what he was doing to you, making himself feel better about his betrayal by pretending he had found true love." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Marcus had been living multiple lives, telling each of us whatever we needed to hear to keep us under his control. The man I had been married to for 12 years was essentially a fiction, a carefully constructed persona designed to hide his true character. Over the following weeks, the full extent of Marcus's deception continued to unfold. The district attorney's investigation revealed additional victims: investors who had lost money in fraudulent development projects, business partners who had been cheated out of their fair share of profits. Marcus's web of lies had been far more extensive than even I had realized. The criminal charges were filed 6 weeks after our emergency hearing. Marcus was indicted on 12 felony counts, including securities fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The evidence that Rebecca and I had provided formed the foundation of the prosecution's case, and Marcus's own digital communications provided additional proof of his criminal intent. His passport had already been surrendered, but the criminal charges made his situation even more precarious. His business collapsed within days of the indictment, as clients and investors fled to avoid any association with his fraudulent activities. The assets that he had worked so hard to hide were seized by federal authorities as evidence in the criminal case. The divorce proceedings moved forward with unprecedented speed, given that Marcus had no hidden assets left to fight over. His legal team, faced with overwhelming evidence and federal criminal charges, advised him to agree to whatever terms I demanded rather than risk additional prosecution for obstruction of justice.
In the end, I received everything I was entitled to under New York's equitable distribution laws, plus additional compensation from Marcus's fraudulent conduct and the legal fees I had incurred to uncover his deception. The house was mine, along with the retirement accounts, investment portfolio, and even Marcus's classic car collection that he had tried to hide by transferring ownership to a shell company. But the financial settlement was less important than the sense of justice I felt watching Marcus face the consequences of his actions. He had spent over a year planning my destruction, manipulating multiple women, and committing serious crimes to avoid taking responsibility for his choices. Instead of getting away with his perfect crime, he had destroyed his own life more thoroughly than I ever could have. Marcus eventually pleaded guilty to 8 of the 12 charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, but he still faced 5 to 7 years in federal prison. His law license was suspended, his business reputation was destroyed, and his name became synonymous with fraud and deception in New York's real estate community. Vivian started therapy to work through her experience with Marcus's manipulation, and she eventually found the courage to testify against him in the criminal trial. She told me that helping to expose his crimes was the first step toward rebuilding her self-respect and learning to trust her own judgment again. Rebecca received immunity from prosecution in exchange for her cooperation, but she lost her job and faced professional consequences that would follow her for years. She moved back to her home state to start over, but she stayed in touch to let me know how grateful she was that we had stopped Marcus before he could hurt additional victims. 6 months after the emergency hearing, I was sitting in the living room of my house, the house that was finally and completely mine, when I received a letter from Marcus in prison. His handwriting was shaky, and the tone was a mixture of self-pity and desperate attempts at manipulation. "Cass," the letter began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you how sorry I am for everything that happened. I made terrible mistakes, and I hurt you in ways that I can never undo. But you have to know that what we had was real, that I did love you, even if I lost my way." The letter went on for several pages, full of excuses and justifications and pleas for understanding. Marcus claimed that the pressure of his business had driven him to make poor decisions, that he had never intended to hurt me, that he had been planning to confess everything and make things right. I read the entire letter twice, then threw it in the fireplace and watched it burn. Marcus was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to rewrite history to make himself appear more sympathetic. Even facing prison time for his crimes, he couldn't bring himself to take full responsibility for what he had done. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked through my house, appreciating the silence and the peace that had replaced months of anxiety and deception. The rooms that had once felt tainted by Marcus's lies now felt clean and hopeful, ready for whatever new chapter of my life might unfold. I had learned things about myself during this ordeal that I never could have discovered in the safety of my old marriage. I had learned that I was stronger than I had ever realized, more resilient and more capable of fighting for what I deserved. I had learned that my professional skills could be weapons when wielded with precision and determination. Most importantly, I had learned that I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth or determine my future. Marcus had tried to erase me from my own life, to reduce me to an obstacle in his path toward what he thought would be happiness with other women. Instead, he had freed me from a marriage built on lies and given me the opportunity to discover who I really was when I stopped trying to be the wife he wanted me to be. The anniversary dinner that was supposed to be my humiliation became the beginning of my liberation. Marcus thought he was so clever, bringing his mistress to announce that he had chosen her over me. But his greatest miscalculation was underestimating the woman he had married, forgetting that I was smart enough and strong enough to turn his own weapons against him. In the end, Marcus had chosen poorly in every possible way. He had chosen deception over honesty, manipulation over respect, temporary pleasures over lasting relationships. He had chosen to gamble everything on a plan that depended on my weakness and naivete. His choices had cost him his freedom, his fortune, his reputation, and any chance of redemption. I had chosen differently. I had chosen truth over comfortable illusions, justice over revenge, strength over victimhood. My choices had cost me a marriage that was built on lies, but they had gained me a life that was entirely my own, a future that no one could take away from me. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked at my reflection in the mirror and smiled. It was the same smile I had worn at La Bernardine when Vivian announced that Marcus had chosen her, the smile of a woman who knew something that no one else in the room understood. Except now, I knew something even more important. I had chosen myself, and that choice had made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.